Hello, everybody. Hopefully, everybody can see us and hear us. If you can see us and hear us, give us a thumbs up. We are here on LinkedIn Live right now. Hopefully, the audio is good since we are talking about tone of voice today. So make sure if everybody can see us, say hi, thumbs up. We can see it all. So as we're welcoming everybody in right now, I just want to say hello. I'm literally looking at all the comments coming in right now. So we have people who are logging in from Asia, Sydney, Australia, Oakland, California, Cupertino, literally Texas, literally from all over the world right now. So welcome so much. Welcome, honestly, to our Soulcast Media Live. I'm very, very excited to do this. So for everybody who's here right now, we are doing a live event with Dr. Wendy LeBorgne, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes. We're going to be talking about how to utilize your tone of voice. I know Dr. Wendy has tons of really good information. I'm so excited for her to share her tips. A little bit about kind of what we should be doing today for those who are watching. So this is going to be about 45 minutes, 50 minutes long, this chat Dr. Wendy and I are going to have. Any comments or questions that you have, please throw it in the LinkedIn chat function. I have somebody who's monitoring it, and we will definitely leave time to answer any questions that you may have in the end. And I'm sure there will be questions. But you know what? Without further ado, what I want to do is I'll do a quick introduction about who I am for those who don't know, and then I'll have Dr. Wendy give us a quick introduction of who she is and the work she does. So hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. We are a business communications agency, and we do all things communications. We love teaching people how to be a better communicator. We work with corporate clients one-on-one. We have a membership and e-courses. That's a little bit about me. Dr. Wendy here. I'm so happy that she's here joining us. Dr. Wendy, do you want to let everybody know a little bit about who you are and the work you do?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Jessica, for having me. And I look forward to all of your questions because there's nothing I love more than talking about voice and how it impacts listeners. I am Dr. Wendy LeBorgne. I am a voice pathologist. And for the last 25 years of my career, I've actually taken care of vocal injury and elite voices. So my research is really focused on what makes elite voices elite, what do we like to listen to, and then how we train these voices. And you'll hear me use the term vocal athlete because just like going to the gym, we can maximize performance by training voice. And I'm not talking singing training. I'm talking about understanding the prosody that we use. It's more than just, I hopefully we'll take a little deeper dive, more than just tone of voice. And there's cultural bias and gender bias and all of these things that go into how we perceive voices. So that's a little bit about me, and you can certainly learn more if you wanted to take a look and look up my stuff. So I want to get into conversation with Jessica because I know we've had good conversation on the front side of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, right now we have more than 60 people who are watching us live right now. So welcome. Dr. Wendy just gave a little introduction about who she is. And I'll share a story about how I was the one that reached out to Dr. Wendy. And the reason why is because Dr. Wendy, she actually did a TedX talk specifically speaking about tone of voice. And so for those who haven't checked it out yet, definitely do, because when Dr. Wendy, I really thought it was fascinating the way you broke down tone of voice. Because a lot of the times when we think, and I'll say from my personal experience, I always thought, it's just what we sound like, right? What's there to it, right? It's just our voice. But the way you actually broke it down, which I do want to talk about in a little bit, is there's actually things we can do to change our tone of voice. And it really is what you call this voice brand. But before we dive into that, actually, Dr. Wendy, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, why is having I'm just going to say good, I don't even know if good's the right word, but why is focusing on having a good tone of voice so important for our careers?
Well, voice in and of itself can make up at least 55% of what people perceive when they look at us from a communication standpoint. So we know there's nonverbal things, the actual voice beyond the word. That's why my TEDx talk is called Beyond Words, because beyond the words you say, it is how it is delivered and received. And certainly in this day and age, when we are doing so much on video, I know I saw people talking about Clubhouse, which is all audio, right? We're just listening to voices in this area. So the quality of your voice and the elements that go in to the overall voice become imperative for people making judgments about you. I mean, initially they'll make judgments just by listening to you about probably your gender, your socioeconomic status, the level of your education, potentially what part of the country you're from, or what part of the world you're from, simply based on the sound of your voice. All of us have had that experience where we pick up the phone and we know immediately who's on the other end from the first word they say hello, right?
Mm-hmm. Makes a huge difference. So actually, I'm going to say I'm actually getting some comments right now that I think we both have to speak a little louder right now.
Okay.
Which is great. We'll practice utilizing our stomach voice actually when we speak. So, I'm going to make sure I'm projecting so everybody can hear me as well. But actually, one of the things I wanted to ask you is this idea of a stomach voice when we speak, since we're, you and I are now kind of doing it. But what is the stomach voice, Dr. Wendy, and how do we use it when we're speaking with other people? And why should we use a stomach voice?
So I don't necessarily use that word stomach voice. When people talk about that, what they're talking about is using probably diaphragmatic breath support in order to be able to produce voice. So your voice is made up physiologically of your respiratory system, which is your power generator. So those, from a physiologic standpoint, actually make up of your external and internal intercostals, as well as your diaphragm and your abdominal muscles. And then vocal folds are your sound generator, as well as the rest of the laryngeal muscles. You have 13 intrinsic laryngeal muscles and then 26 extrinsic. And then everything up above your vocal folds, we call the filter or the resonance tract. And that's what amplifies and magnifies the sound. And that's actually what makes you sound like you and me sound like me. This idea of stomach voice, or the idea of using adequate breath support in order to support the sound, it becomes about efficiency of voice, right? Because we can breathe a lot of different ways and still produce voice. But if we think about efficiency of a car running, if you have 3 tires that are filled up with air and 1 tire is flat, the car is still going to drive, but it's not nearly as efficient. So from a vocal standpoint, if you have adequate breath support to be able to set those vocal folds into vibration, you have efficiency of the system. So if you have to talk for 2 hours or 4 hours, or in meetings or with clients, you are very efficient in the system. If there's a compromise in any of those systems, you compensate somewhere else. So it becomes about efficiency with breath, but you can breathe a lot of different ways.
So one question is, can people change their tone of voice? And if they can change it, how do they change it? Or at least how can they start thinking about changing their tone of voice so they have that leadership presence?
That is a great question. So one thing I will always say to my clients is, what is your authentic voice? Because, at the end of the day, I can sound like this, or I can sound like this. But I always say, you got to take off the Spanx and the makeup. And my husband sees me at the end of the day, and it's got to be authentic. And your voice is the same thing. I can teach people to use different voices. However, it's ultimately got to be authentic to you and who you are as a person. So it becomes about voice maximization. Now, if we go back into what creates a leadership voice, besides authenticity, because if you're not authentic, we're not going to trust you. And we want the voice to fit the person. So if you're a 6'4" male, you're probably not going to have a voice that sounds like this, right? And similarly, I see a lot of times with women who might be tinier or smaller people, their vocal tract is actually shorter. So it's kind of like if you've ever
Mhm.
heard the difference between a piccolo and a flute playing the same note. A piccolo is always going to sound higher to our ears, even
Yeah.
though the pitch is the same, right? Because the tube length is different. So again, it becomes about efficiency.
Yeah.
In leadership, we also know, unfortunately, men who have lower pitched voices, they actually father more children. They hold positions of higher leadership. Um, Women sometimes who get into low pitched voices to come to the table,
Yeah.
we're just perceived as aggressive. So we've got to find that balance of authentic voice for you and then voice maximization. Um, I live in a world right now where some people want what we call non-binary voices, where we're not, it's kind of a gender neutral voice. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that go into training that, from breath to sound to resonance and prosody, how we speak. All of those things go into voice maximization.
So when you're saying, that statistic that you just gave, men who have lower voices tend to be seen as more authoritative, but women, if their voice is too low, then they can seem as aggressive. But I'm sure if their voice is very high, they're seen as inexperienced, right? So how do you find that medium if, for example, I was somebody who's like, okay, I'm ready to craft my voice. What do I do?
So one of the things I would do with you is we'd say, all right, what are voices that you like? Who are
Mm.
voices that you don't like? So we've all in business made vision boards, or most of us have made vision boards of
Mhm.
what we do. So I work with my clients on creating a vocal vision board,
Mm.
and what's realistic and what is unrealistic for your voice. If we take any athlete, we can always give them exercises to make them better at their sport, at their craft. So I can give you exercises and things to do to make you better at your craft,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean you're going to have the voice of James Earl Jones or something like that, because
Darn.
there are physiologic limitations, right,
Yeah.
to what we can do, but we can always craft a better voice. So I say you can starve a Saint Bernard, but they're never going to look like a greyhound because their DNA is different. But we can make the best looking Saint Bernard and the best looking greyhound. So from a voice perspective, finding your authentic voice, reaching your vocal goals, and also one of the things I ask of my clients, first of all, when we look at our own voices, it's kind of like standing naked in front of the mirror.
Mhm.
We look at all of the flaws and we
Yeah.
hear all the things we hate about our voice. And I always want a 360-degree view of what other people think of your voice. So, I will take my professional opinion, I'll take your opinion of what you perceive. And then if you're in a corporate environment or in a work environment, we might ask some of the people around you, what do you think about their voice? What do you like
Mhm.
or don't like about their voice? And very specific questions so that we can maximize their quality for them.
That's true. You're totally right. I think sometimes we are the most, harsh critic when it comes to our own voice. I remember when I first started out as a television news reporter. For those who don't know, that's my background. That's how I started really honing in on good communications. But as a broadcast news reporter, we always do voiceovers, is what we call it, right? So we're narrating the story, and so for us, I was very self-conscious because I always thought my voice needed to be that broadcast voice, whatever that broadcast voice was. And I was like, oh, but my voice is so high. I didn't really like that. So I remember at that time, I like artificially just kept trying to suppress my voice, like push it down. But then the problem was it just sounded so unnatural and very inauthentic. So I think I was overcompensating for what I thought I should be sounding like, which in the end, when I became, and when I went up the news ladder, the way I talked was actually much more natural. So
Right.
yeah.
And also, for people who are trying to change the quality of their voice or change their tone of voice, if you did that for a long period of time and it wasn't efficient, you would actually fatigue. You get vocal fatigue, you get hoarseness because you're doing something that your body's not, doesn't have the stamina or power to do. So I think of a lot of what I do is going to the gym. We can do very specific physiologic exercises to strengthen the muscles of what we call chest voice or head voice, not from a singing perspective, but from a flat out speaking perspective. Maximize this resonance for you or for whomever to get there. Going back to what you were playing with and trying, I think in this world, one of the things that's challenging but also fun is you've got to play with your voice, right?
I like that.
And so most of us don't look that great at the gym when we're like on the treadmill doing exercise, but the hope is on the other side, we're going to look better for going, right? So sometimes, and I also cannot get in shape by watching somebody else run on the treadmill. I actually physically have to do it myself. And so from a voice perspective, you can't just listen to things and think that it's just going to happen in your voice. You have to try these things. You have to practice them. You have to play with your voice. We work on what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what sounds good, what doesn't sound good. And just like any new task, when you're trying something new from a voice perspective, it sometimes feels a little bit unnatural or weird. And until you embody that, or it does feel natural, it's never going to be authentic.
Okay. So for those who are listening right now, which by the way, thank you so much for those tuning in. I'm here with Dr. Wendy and we're talking about how to craft your leadership tone of voice. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw it in the chat. But, Dr. Wendy, now that, we're talking about, okay, developing our tone of voice and, okay, how? Like, what do I need to do? What do I need to write down? You mentioned vision board earlier. Like, what should I do to start?
So if you want to create kind of a voice vision board, I usually start with people. What do they like about their voice and what do they not? So, or what do they want it to be or what do they not? So you can cut out words like shrill, nasal. People are usually really good about telling me what they don't like about voices. Like, I don't like a voice that sounds like this all the time, right? Like it that, so whatever that is to you, tight, shrill, nasal, we know what we don't want it to be. So you put that on one side. We create the things we do. We want it to be present. We want it to be full. And so then from an individual standpoint, we say, okay, where are we starting with this? Breath. We work on breathing exercises. You talked about belly breath, stomach breath. So it's that idea. If we even right now wanted to take an easy breath in, one of the ways that I tell folks to take an easy breath in is to breathe through your nose like you're smelling something good, your favorite food or, flowers. So you take this nice, easy breath. And then maybe you count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just something very simple to start training the breath. If we want to do vocal flexibility exercises, right? Because in order for you to have inflection in your voice, just like if you want to be able to touch your toes, you've got to actually stretch those muscles. So a vocal flexibility exercise would actually even be just a slide up and down. So is truly a stretch, a contraction of the vocal folds. Some people will use what we call a semi-occluded voice, where we use a lip buzz, like, and many people might do that for a vocal warm-up but have no idea what they're doing. But that is actually a stretch and a contraction. And if you do that every day, you start to gain some flexibility of that muscle. We do agility exercises, and the agility exercise, which is where we move quickly, might be something where we do articulatory agility. So we might use the word buttercup and we might go buttercup, 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 where we're coordinating and changing the placement of the tongue. So those are just some things that from a breath, sound, and resonance standpoint that we might start with.
Honestly, those were fantastic tips. Hopefully everybody who was listening was writing down the things that they needed to do, because honestly, that is key. I imagine, though, some people who are listening right now, first of all, they may feel silly doing these vocal exercises. They're like, this is like, yeah, it just seems silly. So that's one hurdle that I think people have to get over. But the second thing is, okay, as they're doing these vocal exercises at home, in private, if you need to start out that way, what should they be noticing as they're doing this?
So admit first up, they are silly and they're sounding ridiculous. And you do need to do these in private or in, you're on mute in your car. Do not do these in public. Don't try these things in public first. Okay. And so what should they be feeling? So from the breathing exercise, when you breathe, if you put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, I'm going to back up just a little bit. If you take a breath in through your nose, most of us are going to feel that belly expand. If you're feeling a lot of chest extension, if you're feeling this breath, then that is not a released breath from a lower belly perspective. That is more what we call clavicular breathing. And then we'd start there to start to change those respiratory patterns to be able to get that breathing a little bit low. Some of it is based off body type. Some people can breathe what we call more thoracically, or they might get a little bit more of a lateral breath. So when they take a breath, they kind of go out this way. And that's okay. What we just don't want is all these shoulders coming up and doing like that's not healthy. When you do the stretch up and down, one of the things we don't want to see is muscles sticking out. So we should not see, we shouldn't see grabbing of that throat. Your head shouldn't be coming up or tucking down when we're doing that stretch and contraction. And it's okay to feel stretch, but you should never feel pain or strain with any of these things. And you only want to do them just like starting any new exercise. Even though I'd love to go to the gym one day a week for 3 hours and be done, you fatigue. So when you start doing these exercises, do them for 2 to 3 minutes at a time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes during the day. It's not 20 minutes of I'm going to sit down and work on my voice, because if you're not quite at that level, and some of my artists and some of my high impact voice users they have this stamina, but when you're first starting out, it's short, frequent practice sessions. It's not, I have to spend an hour on my voice today. It's broken down.
I think my biggest takeaway, just, having this conversation with you is, first of all, we have to kind of get in touch with our voice more than just us talking and hearing ourselves, but like truly, just listening. Okay. And actually one of the other questions I have for you is, should people record themselves talking and evaluate their voices that way? What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, absolutely. Again, if you're a tennis player, you videotape yourself, you watch your hit, you watch your serve. That's the only way you get better, is to be self-informed. I don't always say self-critical, but being self-informed about what's working, what's not working, where do you need to make improvements, right? Absolutely. We haven't quite gotten into those 5 elements that I think go into vocal brand, but one is the actual quality of your voice. Do you start with a normal vocal mechanism? We have my larynx is back over here, right? So, literally the voice box, right? There we go. It's sitting around this way. But the vocal folds are all inside there. There's my camera. So there's the vocal folds inside there, right? And so, do you start off with a normal mechanism? Because we as a society, we kind of like in America a little bit of hoarseness in voices because it's interesting. Uniqueness is what gets hired. It doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be interesting. So quality of voice, is it a normal quality? Is it hoarse? Is it breathy? So that's one thing. The one is quality. One is your intonation patterns. Do you have normal intonation patterns? Is it too bland, where we're not getting any variability in the sound quality at all? And that is perceived as boring. If you add a couple of the other qualities, like if you do loud and monotone, that becomes and low pitched, that becomes authoritative. I need you to get this done today. Like that is not perceived as particularly friendly.
Yep.
So, we have to add some variability to intonation. Conversely, if you get that intonation pattern too sing-songy, all of a sudden it sounds like you're talking to a 2-year-old. So again, we got to find this normal rhythm of
Mhm.
what intonation. So there's quality, there's intonation pattern, there's loudness. If you're really quiet, then people think that you're not well informed. And then my quiet people who are naturally quiet people, that is not
Mhm.
me. But if you're a naturally quiet person and you want to talk loudly, all of a sudden it sounds kind of forced because that is not authentic to them. And so we have to teach them how to maximize their intensity. But at the end of the day, it's the variability in intensity that's interesting. You and I talked earlier that one of the things people hate right now on videos is silence.
Yes.
It's so uncomfortable to be quiet. And so this bothers people. So similarly to loud and soft, there is silence. And if you really want to grab somebody's attention from a leadership standpoint, if you're talking in a meeting and you get quiet, I promise it makes people look up. It also makes them incredibly uncomfortable because they don't know what they've missed. So we want to change that intonation or change that intensity pattern of like, I need you to get this done. So that the high and low of intensity. If I'm really angry at my kids, I usually get really quiet. I don't scream at them because if I get quiet, it's going to grab their attention.
Mhm.
So loudness. Then we have, I'm thinking about my circles here of voice branding. Intonation, rate of speech is the other one. So is it fast? Is it slow? Again, we like things, if we think rhythmically, just like listening to a piece of music, when we have these things that are that variability in rhythm is actually what's interesting to our ears. And so from a speech pattern standpoint and a leadership standpoint, if you slow down your rate of speech,
Mhm.
all of a sudden it changes that feeling. Versus if I'm talking really, really fast and right, then that also changes your perception of me and my leadership capabilities. So again, we combine all of these things of low pitch, slowed rate, or high pitched, fast rate. If I'm really high pitched and fast rate and really into me, I mean, that is perceived as naive, insincere, those types of things. If I go the opposite direction, we hear, um, you know, I need you to get this done today. It's authoritative, it's aggressive. So finding that balance in all of those 5 elements is what ultimately creates your voice brand.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what you just pointed out is, your voice is made up of all these different elements, right? And you are in control of all these elements, how fast you speak, how loud or how soft you are. Like these are things you can control and you should control whenever you're walking into a high stakes situation where, it's really important that you get your message across, right? So again, a lot of the things everything that honestly you're saying, Dr. Wendy, so important. It's just that we just have to get ourselves to remember these things, right? Remember that these are things that we can control. So when people are like, it's just the way I sound, it's not just the way you sound. It's you controlling all these other elements, how fast you talk, how loud you are, your inflections, right? So yes, it's absolutely controllable. So I'm actually seeing a lot of fantastic questions come in. We will get into the questions in just a little bit. But one of the last things I do want to ask you, Dr. Wendy, is okay. For me, I will talk about rate of speaking because for me, I notice when I get really excited, I just start talking really fast. And a part of it is because I feel like I'm so passionate, whatever it is that I'm talking about, right? Do you think that therefore, if I'm talking about something I'm really excited about, I should slow down my speaking or not necessarily? What do you think?
Well, when you get excited, the rate of speech does get faster. Like that's a normal thing.
Hmm.
For women, I always, not just women, but the voice is the emotional valve to your soul, right?
I love
So
that.
we can always, if somebody's angry, if they're upset, if they're getting ready to cry, we hear that like tightness. I mean, you can tell, you can just listen to somebody and know they're on the verge of losing it. For women, and it's hardwired in your brain, the neural pathways from the emotional center of your brain go directly to the muscles of your larynx. So
Hmm.
that's hard science. It's very difficult to disassociate that. You talked about, getting excited and passionate about what we
Hmm.
do. That has to come through, especially when you're a leader.
Yep.
This becomes increasingly a challenge, I think, for some women leaders because women in general are perceived as being more emotional
Mm.
than their male counterparts. And women's goal of communication, as far as from a rules perspective, our goal is to connect with other people. A man's actual view of communication in a meeting is to use language to reach an end goal. So we're not actually playing by the same communication rules
Hmm.
unless we know the rules of the game. But when you walk into a boardroom, right? BC, which I call before COVID, right? BC times, BC times. Um, you know, in a C-suite, the room is painted a specific color to create a certain mood. The table is chosen with certain numbers of seats around it. When you're a leader, you know where you're supposed to sit.
Hmm.
I will just say that when you're a leader and you are passionate about what you're coming into a meeting about, I think you have to be intentional and
Hmm.
thoughtful and not necessarily word for word practice, but you need to have a pretty good roadmap from a vocal standpoint to be able to convey your passion without letting your emotion impact your voice so that it doesn't become a detractor and people aren't going, oh my gosh, I totally didn't hear what you said because she was talking totally fast, right? So it's got to be that balance between these are my talking points. This is where I want my voice to go. When I think preachers are really good at this.
Hmm.
You think about an arc of a sermon or an arc of a story, they might start out here and then by the middle we're kind of getting up here and then we come back down, right?
Yeah.
So in those meetings, not that you want to take that exact storyline, but you've got to get your attention of your audience first. Then you can dive into that story a little bit and use your voice as your asset, and then wrap it up using things like repetitive things that you've said back. I need you to get this done. I am so excited to roll this out with all of you guys. So again, it's that I'm so excited is in a slow pace. To
Yep.
roll this new product out is fast,
The
right? So
variety.
we can show the variability in rate to
Mhm.
convey the excitement with I'm so excited to share this all with you and I can't get to that has a completely different feel from a
Yeah.
leadership perspective.
One of the things that I always say is, we're not the best judge of our own communications ability. And the reason why is because if I think I'm a fantastic communicator, but nobody understands what I'm saying, I'm not a good communicator. So one of the things I always encourage the people that I've worked with is ask your peers what they think about your communications ability. Ask your peers to give you feedback on what they think your style of communicating is. Do they think that you tend to talk really fast in meetings? Do they, whatever it is, right? Because again, we only see what we see, right? And I think sometimes we can be biased within ourselves. Perhaps we're much better than we think we actually are, or perhaps there's more work that we can do, right? That's why I always say communications is a journey. We always need to be practicing.
And for me, as my PhD is in communication sciences and disorders, communication is a circle. When you're a leader, you often think communication is this.
Mm-hmm.
Communication is actually mostly listening, right? And in this virtual environment, it's very difficult to read those around you because we're not there. I have no idea whether anybody's listening could care at all about what I'm saying, right? But that idea that when you communicate either one-on-one, in small groups, or to 10,000 people, that ability to get the receiver to ensure that what you've said from a vocal standpoint is perceived appropriately becomes really important. And your voice is the number one aspect. Because if I came in and I was talking to all of you guys like this for the whole time, then you would probably perceive, A, you'd probably turn me off, but B, that is a completely different perception than maybe what you're getting right now. And so it becomes your voice, especially in this day and age, is your most important communication asset.
Completely agree. Okay, so now I actually want to start answering people's questions.
Okay.
Tons of questions coming in. So everybody who's watching right now, thank you so much. Keep the questions coming. So one of the first questions that we got was actually somebody noticed us using our hands a lot when we're talking. Their question was, does using our hands help us when we are actually speaking? Does it help with our tone of voice? Is it good? Is it bad?
It's good. So again, we are getting information, especially in this digital age right now, from hand gestures. We get them in person too. And you and I both know, when you're on a little screen like this, your gestures need to be inside the screen, right? If I were standing on a stage and I were talking to 10,000 people, my gestures would actually be much bigger because they need to read differently when I'm doing this versus if I'm in stage or in a bigger setting. But absolutely, they just can't be too fast, right? They can't, because that then leads to if I do this and I'm not even talking fast, you're perceiving my voice as being faster. Similarly, when I work with some of my elite artists who have to speak or sing really loudly, if they make big gestures, we're going to perceive them as being louder than they are because they've made their body physically bigger. And so the perception is they're actually louder from a vocal perspective. The gestures need to be genuine as well. Pointing gestures out, not so good all the time.
Yeah, I don't like that. Point, please.
And empathy and leadership is a big aspect of leadership. And from a camera perspective, if we were in person, one of the things we would do in a meeting is lean in. If I lean into you, that starts to look really weird.
On
camera, so there's some things, an empathetic voice is slowed down a little bit. The uploading and downloading that happens right now with video conferencing, the speed at which that happens, people talk about, Zoom fatigue and communication. One of the biggest things that's happening is all of our teeny tiny facial gestures that we don't even realize that we perceive face to face, we're actually losing in online communication because the uploads and downloads delay that facial gesture. So hand motions help with this, or gesturing helps because our brains are actually trying to fill in the blanks for things that we can't see in people's eyes and faces that we would be seeing face to face. So voice obviously becomes important, but going back to the hand gestures question, it becomes important right now with communication.
Interesting. One of the other questions that we have, by the way, anybody has any question, please throw them in to the chat function. What's your thought about, does it make a big difference in vocalizing when we're standing or sitting? Is there should we not? What are your thoughts on standing versus sitting?
So if you're sitting in a meeting, as long as you're sitting up fairly straight, I think you can get great breath support to breathe appropriately for speaking. Most of us, it depends on your speaking situation. If you're standing up and speaking, you certainly need to make sure that you know how to control your breath and your voice in a standing position versus sitting. But you can do either effectively. You need to train for both because most of us have both of those situations.
Yeah, I will say, so I do a lot of corporate trainings and a lot of people ask me, do I stand or sit? And actually I always sit when I do my corporate trainings versus, if I was doing this in person, I definitely would be standing. But because we're in a virtual environment, I tend to feel more comfortable sitting down, literally in this chair right now. But I don't think it really affects my projection because I am so aware of it.
Right.
If I wasn't aware of it, perhaps my energy level wouldn't be as high. But because I'm sitting and I'm aware I need to project, I therefore project. So it's that self-awareness. One of the other questions that we have coming in is, so what are your thoughts about maximizing the intensity of your voice without sounding rude or yelling? What's that balance?
Right. So there is normal variability, and there is also cultural bias with this
Mm,
too, right? So I'm from initially outside. I'm from the East Coast, from an Italian family, and so talking loud and fast. So
oh, okay, you're back.
I'm sorry, talking loud and fast is actually part of who I am. If you didn't talk over people, you didn't actually get heard.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally, for you coming from probably an Asian environment, talking loudly is not perceived very well, right? Like, so there is some cultural bias to that. We know where some norms are
Mm-hmm.
um, for normal loudness variability. It's also going to depend on the situation, right? Um, if you are in a boardroom with 10 people, the loudness you need is not the same as what you might need at a networking event at a bar. So, because you're going to have to be louder to be heard. Um, so, there is some variability in normative loudness. If you feel like you're straining, or if it is not feeling normal, then you're pushing too much. There are ways to amplify your voice. So, for example, if I were going, hey, you, like that is not a healthy way to talk loud. If
Yeah.
I have trained myself to go, hey, you, I can do that all day. So it's that balance of making sure when you are loud, it's done effectively and in a healthy way.
One question that we have coming in is, how do you know when you've arrived to your authentic voice? How do you know when you've achieved that?
I think when you come out of a meeting and you go, I feel good about that. Like, I didn't, we know that speaking for most people is one of their biggest fears.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you have worked on your voice and you get a different result than you did before. So, that idea that when you go into a meeting, you've used those skills that you've been working on, like slowing down in certain passages or using your excitement where you need to use it, and you got the desired results, you can say that your voice was authentic and it worked for you. Um, Sometimes people will comment on your voice. Usually they comment when it's not good. Oftentimes, they'll say, oh, do you have a cold? Or, but if you're finding people are responding
Mm-hmm.
in a more positive way, I think that's also a good indicator that things are going right.
Yeah, no, I can definitely attest to that. I think, as I was mentioning earlier, when I was a broadcast reporter, I was playing around with my voice, just like you mentioned earlier, which, by the way, for those who didn't catch that when we were talking about this earlier in our session, we should be playing with our voice, meaning we should be trying to practice all these different techniques, talking high, talking low, talking fast, talking slow. We should be doing that, right? In private if you need to. But I think that's the only way we can find what's working for us, right? So
Right.
when I was, finding my voice back when I was starting out as a reporter, there were days when I would try to, talk one way, talk this way, but eventually through that, I was like, I think I got it. Like, I think I know what I need to do. And I think for me, for those, if this can resonate with you too, Dr. Wendy, I just realized that, first of all, I just have to be really comfortable with whatever it is that is my voice. And a lot of it's also just, you know, showing that enthusiasm, that energy, being okay showing emotion and not feeling I have to be stone faced in order to be taken seriously, right? Sometimes people feel that the only way to be taken serious is to just be like this. And that's not the case.
No, and smiling is
Mhm.
huge. We hear a smile in your voice, even if we don't see it. And so, just the idea, even if you are not feeling great, if you put a smile on that face, people are going to perceive your voice as happier, as engaged. Just put it, we say fake it till you make it kind of thing sometimes. And
Hey.
you as a broadcast journalist also know that when you were messing around with your voice, the people that watched your show would be telling you whether they liked it or not, because people are very critical of public figures
Mhm.
regarding their voices, what they wear, what they look like, how they wear their hair. I mean, you know that.
Yes,
And they have no qualms with telling you those things. When I
unfortunately.
and when I work with these high impact voices and CEOs and broadcast journalists and
Mhm.
people that we see on stage and audiobook record, all of these things, they do have voice coaches.
Mhm.
It's kind of like athletes.
Yep.
They're naturally talented people, but they take that to the next level by engaging a personal coach to maximize their performance, because there is a lot you can learn by watching and doing, but if you really want to move to that next level,
Mhm.
you do have to have some personalized attention, because we all have different issues,
Yep.
right? And I laugh because I kind of say, the Jillian Michaels voice. I say, okay, this is where you're starting. This is where you want to be. This is what we need
Mhm.
to do. I give you the tools that you need to be authentic, right, in what you're doing.
I will say, I don't think you know this, Dr. Wendy, but I actually had a voice coach before too. This was when I was actually living in New York at the time. I was like, really, aggressive in terms of really wanting to improve. I was like, I need to invest in this. I need to find somebody who could help me. So I did have a voice coach, she definitely helped me find that authentic voice. So for those who are just joining, we're actually going to be wrapping up soon. Literally, the time just flew
I
per
could talk to you
usual.
forever. It's
I
great.
know. We love this topic. So we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but if anybody has any other last minute questions, feel free to throw it in. But in the meantime, right now, Dr. Wendy, where can people find you?
So they can find me at drwendyvoice.com. That's my website. You can, if you're interested in learning more about, I have on my website for executive speakers, you can book a 10-minute, consultation to say, hey, is this a good fit?
Yeah.
I do one-on-one trainings. I do workshops on voice. Corporate events, things like that. So that's something you're interested in, or maximizing. Specifically, men and women have really gravitated towards maximizing their voices in this
Mhm.
environment and ensuring that they're getting through to their team, their
Mhm.
customers. If they're going to a bigger, I coach TEDx and TED speakers, and you know, my Broadway stars. Broadway's a little shut down at the hot moment, but we'll be back. But being able to make sure that those voices are
Mhm.
what you listen to on the radio and television on a regular basis, or if you're a CEO in the boardroom and you just want to maximize your potential.
Yeah. Or aspiring managers, the directors,
Absolutely.
right. Um, One final thing so I'll add one final note, and then Dr. Wendy, if there's anything you want to share as a parting note. But one of the things I will say when it comes to tone of voice is, a lot of us now in this virtual world, we're just jumping from meeting to meeting, right? We're back to back video calls. It's exhausting, right? And sometimes if we had just had a stressful meeting, we're ending that, we're jumping into a new meeting. Sometimes we can carry that stress into that next meeting, right? So therefore, we're showing up fatigued, stressed, tense, right? But I really feel that it's so important for all of us to just be mindful of the way we are showing up on these video calls, right? I get it. That last call was super stressful with your boss or your team, but now you're on a call with a potential client. You really do want to just, make sure you're showing up, be happy, be energetic, be excited. That can definitely help with your tone of voice. So that's kind of my parting note.
Absolutely. And I think you have to do vocal resets
Mm-hmm.
in between, just like you might need to use the restroom in between a meeting. If you step out of your office and use your home restroom, take 2 minutes and literally do that stretch and contraction, because if everything's really tight, we're going to hear it in your voice. So that is something that you can do. If you're getting vocal fatigue from being on calls all the day, or if you get vocal fatigue from wearing a mask, because I can tell you mask wearing is incredibly vocally fatiguing when you're talking through masks.
Very good point. Yeah.
For a variety of reasons, there are absolutely things we can do to minimize vocal fatigue. Everything from strengthening the laryngeal muscles to maximizing resonance, and then resetting in between meetings from a vocal perspective, from a breath perspective. And it really could take less than 2 minutes to be able to just reset breath, reset voice. Let's do this next meeting. It's a fresh start. I just would say your voice really defines you. It can also empower you. So train and think like a vocal athlete. That's the best thing that I can say. Know your strengths, because that's what we want to maximize. We'll minimize our detractors, but really focus on your vocal strengths, because there are so many great things that I know each of you do.
Yep. Play with your voice. And honestly, the more you play with it, the more in tune your voice is, the more you can control it, the more self-awareness you have. Dr. Wendy, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. This hour's flown by. It's just flown by.
I so appreciate you jumping on our Soulcast Media Live. I mean, my goal with doing these, for those who don't know, we've already done a few of them, and I really just look for experts in the field of communications who just obviously are so passionate. You're passionate about tone of voice, and I'm just so honored for you to come on and share your expertise. Thank you, everybody who joined. I hope you guys learned a lot from this, last 45, 50-minute session. You can find my work on soulcastmedia.com. You can find Dr. Wendy. Where can the people find you again?
Again, drwendyvoice.com. You can also Google my TEDx talk on Beyond Words, and hopefully it will provide you with some quick information on what goes into a voice brand.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, I appreciate you guys, and I will talk to you guys soon, and let's definitely keep in contact for our next Soulcast Media live event. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.